Okay. So welcome everyone to the State of the Nation with a focus on retail. I guess today we have a story of digital disruption and opportunity. We have a story of leakage and larceny in the supermarket wars. And we have a story about connecting online and offline worlds in the new frontier. But basically, if we look really broadly, on a global front, when we ask people what are the biggest issues facing the world, we're basically seeing, again, terrorism and war taking the biggest spot at 30%. Now, this is before Paris. So when we first started surveying this about 2005, we'd had 5 years of things like September 11, Afghanistan war, we'd had the Iraq war, a whole series of war-related unrest that we'd never seen before in Australia or for a very long time. And then what we see is when we become less concerned about terrorism and war, our concerns about the economy take over. So you've got that sort of challenge going on. But as we speak now, on a global front, we're seeing terrorism as pretty important. In Australia, it's much more about the economy. That black line is really, really strong. Again, this is taken just before Paris, so we'd expect the terrorism thing to be going up a little bit. However, we have to say everything for Australian consumers at the moment is about things economic. It's about costs, it's about the economy, it's about unemployment, it's about rates and all sorts of things, everything to do with the economy. And then if we look at the broad bundle of economic factors, and there's so many of them, it's really kind of hard to get your head around them. But basically in Australia today, we have low levels of inflation, relatively low GDP growth, low interest rates. We have the retail sales actually up 4.6, which is higher than the year before. And we have the Australian dollar playing around 70, a bit over 70 at the moment. So way down from where it was, but it's come up just a little bit. As I said, these things are complex. Some of them affect some people and they affect other people in different ways. So it's really hard to get your head around what this all means. At Roy Morgan, what we believe actually when it comes to the economy is that you need to keep your mind focused on a couple of key metrics. Number one is consumer confidence. Consumer confidence, how people feel about things, is much more likely to drive their behaviour, much more likely to drive their shopping behaviour, their retail sales, the choices that they make. And we have consumer confidence today at 114.5, down 0.5. So consumer confidence took a flying leap when Malcolm Turnbull took over. It's come off a little bit in the last couple of weeks. Really, I think that's to do with concerns about terrorism and those sorts of fears, rather than economic concerns. Down 1.5 in a 2-week period. Business confidence is sitting at 119.3, and that's actually again up since Malcolm Turnbull took over. And for those of you who don't come to these sessions all the time, anything over 100 is actually in really positive territory. People are more optimistic than pessimistic. Anything under 100, you've got more people who are concerned and pessimistic. Unemployment is sitting at 8.8, real unemployment, and underemployment at 8.6. So although these figures are lower than we've seen in the last few months, it's coming down, these are still very high levels of unemployment. Voting intention, again, a major turnaround since Malcolm Turnbull came in. We actually have majority support, 56% support for the LNP government against 44 for Labor, a major change since then. And a very important metric, this government confidence, 119.5. That's the one that tells us that more people, more Australians think the country's going in the right direction than the wrong direction. And that's why I say consumer confidence is probably wobbly, more because of security threats than to do with the economy, because party support's still strong, government support's still strong, and the belief that the country's going in the right direction is also still strong. So broadly, economic things not so crash hot, but consumer confidence and confidence in the government looking fairly strong. So, retail. We estimate from our Roy Morgan data that Australians spend some $102 billion on groceries and $107 billion on what we call discretionary commodities. And that's for people in Australia, pretty much most other things. Most of us don't need another dress. Most of us don't need another wheelbarrow or any other thing. But with those big numbers, retail matters. So what's happening in retail? If we just look at all of the headlines from the last few weeks, we're actually seeing things like Amazon's going to bricks and mortar. We're seeing major designers like Cotton On doing brand new things. Sephora launching online in Australia. International retailers, things that Aldi are doing. There's a whole range of things happening, and these are just broadly the headlines that we've seen only in the last 6 weeks. So this is an industry where there's a whole lot of action happening. So all sorts of things going on there. Australian dollar feeling the pain. Many things. It's an industry where there's a lot of challenges going on. So why is all of this happening? What's likely to happen next? Now, when I was at university, I was told if you want to know what people think or want, ask them, do a survey. Well, obviously I ended up at Roy Morgan Research and have stayed here. But let me tell you, it's not that simple, because people are complicated. When you ask them things, they try and help you, they tell you what they think, but they are actually complicated. So we find, for instance, 58% of people who tell us they feel financially stable at the moment have just cut down on their spending. Conundrum. 65% of people who tell us they're always ready to try new and different products, in practice in our survey, tend to stick to their favourite brands. 20% of people who are constantly watching their weight don't restrict how much they eat of fattening foods. And 55% of people who say the food that they eat is all or almost all vegetarian ate chicken this week, and 37% ate beef. So this isn't to say that the world's full of liars, it's just to say that you can't kind of ask people, so why are you doing this? Why is this happening? You can't even ask retailers, so why is it all happening? So what do you want to do? What do you do when you need to know this stuff? You ask Roy Morgan. Because what we do is we actually pull together the data from trended surveys, looking at the facts, looking at the trends, looking at external sources of data, and we pull together this complicated set of information and try and make sense of it for you. Try and put it into context. And that's what we've got here. I want to just make this point. Gary gave me the wonderful segue about Newspoll. There's plenty of data out in the world and plenty of surveys that are not really real. They're kind of indicative of something, who knows what. At Roy Morgan, we spend so much time trying to measure things accurately. So what you can see here is the ABS quarterly data on sales, aggregating all the sales that they're given, and the Roy Morgan survey data from asking people about a whole range of commodities that they've bought in the last period, usually 4 weeks, what they bought, where they bought it, how much they spent, pulling it together, and you can see, aggregating, weighting that information, you replicate the known facts. Okay, pretty clever. Most people think that's clever. What's really important is, number one, it starts with an accurate base, and number two, we can actually then drill down. You can't, from the ABS type aggregate data, drill down into who, where, how the big spenders versus the little spender, Western Tasmania versus some other place. Once you've got it in a Roy Morgan system, you can start to drill down. So that's the real value with real data. One of our interesting surveys we do is on business. We survey businesses, about 1,000 of them each month, and each quarter we ask these different businesses what's happening in their world and the things that are influencing their business performance. When we ask people in the retail market, here's what they say. Biggest issue facing retail, or the factors most influencing business performance, is the economy or the level of demand, 46%. The next most important thing is changing consumer expectations and demands, 40%. Followed by things like the cost of supplies and raw materials, competition, a whole range of other costs like transport, labour costs, and then technology. So 1 in 5 mention technology. And it's really interesting because when you look at all these things that the retailers say are affecting their businesses, most of them they say are affecting their businesses negatively. Only technology, many more of them, twice as many, say technology is affecting their business positively than negatively. So I think that's a really positive finding. The kind of growth strategies that retailers are likely to be implementing in the next 12 months, mostly it's about developing new products and services. And of course, retail is always about innovation, but we're seeing a whole range, even in that slideshow before, we see a whole range of new products, and many of them are things like retailers starting to, supermarkets starting to sell telephones, services, improved things like flybys and all of those things, bringing more services in together. There's always an issue around internal efficiencies that will continue to dominate. Only 19% are looking at organic growth, and then 18% are expanding into new geographic markets. And so we're seeing things like Aldi, we'll see that kind of expansion. So that's how retailers are actually seeing their world. So key themes emerge around society, changing consumer demand and choices and things, technology and the way that that's operating, economics and politics. We can't do all of these this morning, but they're all covered in the report. So can everyone hear me? Let me check. Yeah, great. In terms of society, Australia's growing, we're ageing, we're increasingly educated, households are smaller, that means there's fewer children. There's an increased amount of renting, less owning and buying your own house, and a much more multicultural society. Every one of these things has issues for retail, and it's worth kind of spending an hour thinking about each of them. But broadly, the multicultural society, look at that big number there, the green line going through, which is Asia and the Middle East increasing. So this is really changing the nature of our society. And the lumps there, this is not a news poll, that's not a sampling issue, that's real. That's what happens when you actually change legislation. There's a change around visas, there's a change around education policy, very quickly changes the nature of the makeup of our society. And I want to look at this employment issue with a little bit of closeness. We talk about unemployment, and there's discussions about what is the real level of unemployment. If we look at the degree to which Australians are employed, you see since about 98, over the first little while, the proportion of Australians employed was clearly growing, flattened out, and we now see over the last little while, it's actually declined. So whatever measure you use, however you want to publicise how well you're doing in terms of unemployment, fewer Australians today are employed. If we made that full-time employed, it would go like that. We've actually got a shift towards part-time employment versus full-time employment. And for the first time, it's the blokes that are suffering. So how cool is that? But seriously, the proportion of women employed is obviously still lower than men, but it's continuing to increase. The proportion of men employed is where the drop's happening, and it's particularly part-time. We're increasingly socially progressive and generally less conservative, but I just want you to see these charts. This is amazing. We've been more and more open-minded and less worried and fearful over the decade until the last year. And we're seeing more and more increased concern. 63% are security conscious. More people now saying the fundamental values of our society are under threat, and I feel less safe than I used to. This is the impact of global terrorism and security threats. And we know that because if we ask people, do you think your neighbourhood's dangerous? Fewer and fewer people are saying yes. It's not the local area, it's this international fear. Every industry now is digital. Nobody can not be digital, and the exponential growth of digital, mobile, video, and the extraordinary extent of automation and online buying and increasingly data, big data and lots of it, is having a huge impact on the very essence of retail. And there's so much happening in the technology space. Everyone under 40 will know what this means. Everyone over 40 will be going, I don't know. It's hard to keep up. And I think we've all got a bit of FOMO. That's fear of missing out. And let me tell you, when I learned what FOMO was, I thought, oh, thank goodness there's a word for it. It's not just me. So there is so much going on. We're taking up technology at a rapid rate in Australia. There's more technology flooding in. Anyone in a business is thinking, how do we keep up? Where do we spend? What do we do? How do we make sure that we don't miss out? So FOMO is a really big issue. Technology is being watched with both fear and excitement. But as I said earlier, retailers in general are seeing technology as positive rather than negative. I'm not going to show you all the slides. At Roy Morgan, we've got real FOMO because we've got to measure all of these things even before we know that they exist. But there's a couple of key things that say it all. Broadband at 82% is now ubiquitous. 59% now have a computer tablet, 73% have a smartphone, see the growth, 52% are into apps. What this means is, number one, we're all connected, all the time and everywhere. That's what these things, the move into mobile and the ease with which people operate, have done. So that's the consumer. Now, we've all seen innovations come and go, like the DVD, digital cameras, etc. Now, you know, if you ever wondered why JB Hi-Fi and those guys did so well, they're the ones selling all of this stuff. So it's interesting from their perspective. For most of us in business, we've got to work out what's going to be a fad, what's going to be the next DVD, and what's going to be the next platform on which everyone's going to be operating, and our businesses had better operate as well. So we at Roy Morgan developed this concept around technology adoption. And essentially it's like an innovation curve, but it's related to technology. And what you've got is you've got your early adopters, those people who are both willing and able to take up technology and have the dollars to spend on it. Am I still okay for sound? Yep. Through to professional mainstream, they're the people who aren't, you know, they don't love technology and look for the new thing just for the sake of it, but they have to be up to date. And then you've got right through to digital life, the youngsters who are into all sorts of technology, but essentially freeware. Everything's got to be free because they just don't have the dollars to spend on it, right through to people who are technophobes. And essentially what we're able to do is actually see, where do these pieces of technology sit? Which of them are becoming mainstream and what's actually happening? So we've seen traditional media, things like TV, have moved right over into the, you know, the real late adopters and the laggards. You've got things like smartwatches, like streaming and Apple TV, still in the realms of the early adopters. Things like LinkedIn, early majority. Smart TVs, only about 2 years ago, smart TVs were way over here as early adopters. So we see them move. Once they become mainstream, you have to keep an eye on them to see that they're going to stay there. And clearly, buying online is an unstoppable force, like the women's movement. So just a few years ago, I'm glad we've got some laughs. Just a few years ago, it was seen as possibly the greatest challenge to the retail industry. And if any of you who are retailers may well have been in groups where you're standing around saying, what are we going to do about these online retailers? It's going to be the death, you know, no more shops, all that stuff. That was the concern. Let me just look for the economy briefly. We saw earlier that the retailers and consumers, for both of those lot, the economy and things economic are extremely important. So what does that mean in general? Our assets in super are still going up, not quite keeping up with population. Our wealth continues to grow, but debt is more than keeping up with it. Now, here's what matters. When it comes to shopping, it's less about super and wealth, it's more about income and spending. So when we look at household income over the last decade, it's increased. So the median income was about $46,400, and over the next 10 years it moved up to $63,000 per annum. So an increase. Hard to see the kind of flattening, etc. in that chart. So let's look here. If we look at that black line, first of all, we see median household income up about 36%. We see that income growth halted after the GFC. See this line here? Hang on, I'll use some technology. There, GFC, it flattened out. Then it kept going again. It flattened, by the way, it didn't drop. And then it kept going again, commodities boom and bust, and we're actually seeing median income household coming down. So that's the first thing. The next thing to note is if you look at the amount that people spend on all their household goods and the amount they spend on supermarkets, that's the red line and the green line, they're tracking well below median income. So people are spending less as a proportion of their median income today, by quite a long shot, than they were 10 years ago. The other thing that I think is really important is if you look at that CPI, Consumer Price Index, see the blue line is kind of pretty consistently charging through there. That's the price of a basket of goodies. And that's real. But consumers don't have to buy a basket of goodies. Consumers can decide to spend less. And in fact, that's exactly what they did. See the red line, what they spent on those sort of goodies was tracking ahead of CPI when things were good, and then it came crashing down. Went ahead of CPI, now it's gone well down. So people are responding by making a choice not to spend. When it comes to this, the grocery spend, very interesting. It was, these things here, and it came below, then it took a dive with the GFC, and it never really picked up. Now that's clearly not because consumers didn't pick up, that's your price wars kicking in. And it's also, while we actually had the commodities boom, all of the prices, the imports, were much lower because we also had a high Australian dollar. So we've got here a really interesting situation where the amount that people are spending on sort of staples, groceries, is actually much, much lower than you would have expected 10 years ago. Now the next thing is, we talked about 36%, but income increases are not uniform across the whole of the population. And this is the case everywhere, beware of averages. What we've actually seen is the big growth in income has come with the older households, those sort of 65 plus. So they've actually seen income growth over the last 10 years of 62%, from a low base, because most of these people are retired. On the other hand, young couples, their income has actually grown only 25%. So they've fallen way behind the norm in terms of Australia. Their income's still higher, they're young couples, they're predominantly employed, it's not surprising. But you see that the divide that's actually occurring. And this is very largely driven by employment. What's happened in that older age group? They've been more likely to stay employed. Since the global financial crisis, people didn't retire. Also, baby boomers don't think they're old, so they stay working. And so there's been an increase from 10% were working 10 years ago to 16% now in that older age group. At the younger end, we've actually had the opposite. The young couples are actually struggling to maintain full-time work. So full-time work was 70% of people in young couples in 2005. It's now down to 67%. They're moving into part-time work for either choice or that's all that they can get. So employment makes a massive difference, and what we're seeing here is that the spending power, we've always known the wealth is with the older people, we're now seeing income and spending power is clearly there as well. So Australians spent over $100 billion a year, $107 billion a year on things in the financial year to June 2015, and that's on these discretionary things like clothes and shoes to hardware and things like that. And our total spend increased by about 5% compared with the previous financial year. So we bought about 1.1 billion of these items. This is the stuff that we consider commodities. So it's everything from clothing, 54% of people, most of us bought clothing in an average 4-week period, through stationery, books, cosmetics, down to home decorations, a whole range of things that people spend money on. Sometimes they do them on a weekly basis, a fortnightly basis, sometimes it's rare. But they're the key commodities that we've got. So we bought around 86.5 million of these items, spending a combined 8.2 billion in an average 4 weeks, making that 107 billion in the past year. Now, what about online? 41% of Australians buy something online. We saw that earlier in an average 4 weeks. And Australians spent almost $38 billion online in the 12 months to June. That's an increase of almost 10%. Again, it was about 10% last year. And the sort of things we're buying online? Lots. So clearly entertainment and leisure has always been a big starter. Then you've got everything from reading material, fashion products, through to baby products and furniture. So this is a 4-week period, so obviously people don't buy furniture every 4 weeks, so they don't buy furniture online every 4 weeks. But basically people are starting to buy most of these products online. And if we spend that, 37.8 billion in a full 12 months, we see the way that it's actually being spent, that the actual dollars. So travel's still a big chunk, 13.6 billion. Entertainment, still a big chunk, 5 billion. Electronics, 4 billion. Clothing, just on 4 billion. So that you can see the actual dollars that are being spent in these markets. If we actually take out of that pie some of the things that you just can't buy in retail bricks and mortar stores, we actually get a 13% year-on-year increase in online spending. So it's real and it's growing. In terms of dollars spent, the categories that are really charging ahead, the ones that are growing, home and garden online, up 26%, electronics up, entertainment and leisure up. All of these things are up pretty much, but more or less than the average. Only health and beauty was down online in the last 12 months. Again, if we look at our technology adoption segments, no surprises. What are these people doing? Well, the early adopters, 65% of them are shopping online. Mainstream, professional mainstream, 51% shopping online. It's very predictable. That's what it's all about. But even technophobes, the last into the market, 20% of those people are shopping online. When we then look at the dollars, it kind of magnifies all of this because, for instance, the technophobes, although there's only 20% of them, they're spending less every time they shop online. And these guys at this early adopter end are spending more. So basically, in terms of dollars, what we're seeing is something like 60% of the online dollars are being spent by early adopters and early majority. Key point to make for all of this is that the digital life, the youngsters, we often make the mistake of saying, oh, technology, young people, my kids are doing this. That's how I have to think when I think about my retail market. Young people, digital life are not the big spenders. They're the ones who are moving to part-time employment, struggling with costs, and they're the ones who don't have the money to spend, and the chart speaks for itself. The big spenders in this space are actually the more affluent early adopters and professional mainstream. Now, internet's not just something that people buy with, it's also something that they use to research. So we've actually got almost 1 in 3 researched a product or service in an average 4-week period. What's interesting here is we actually see there's been a change. So in 2011, most of that researching was done by computer, 21% by computer, 2% on a mobile phone. Today, we've got 25% by doing their researching by computer, plus 10% on mobile phone, 8% by tablet, and obviously a whole bunch of them doing it on all of those things. So the new forms of technology, the take-up of mobile, is just driving research like it's driving retail. What do these shoppers tell us about what they want? Well, we actually see they large majority of them say they only buy from online retailers they know. 47% say they research products and services online but buy offline. Interesting. So it's not just researching and then buying, or, we hear stories about people going into the shop to check prices and then buy online. It's going all different ways. 39% say I'm happy to receive email advertising that's relevant to me. Now, that relates to things like loyalty cards, that relates to CRM systems, that relates to capturing data about people. The issue of relevance is crucial, but permission to advertise and communicate, really important. It relates to big data. 39% say they notice ads when they're online. Of course, that could be for products to buy online immediately, or it could be sending them back to the store. And 21% say they only buy from Australian retailers. That's a big important issue. And I raise that because online shopping was once considered a major threat to local retailers as retail dollars flowed overseas. That was the big concern. And everyone was saying to us, well, how much is overseas, how much is Australian? Really hard to measure. But today we've been measuring it, and we think basically an estimated 72% of Australians, of our online spend, around 27 billion, stays in Australia, is through Australian websites. Whether it's going to homegrown online stores only, or whether it's actually going to the internet offerings of local retailers. But here's the kind of size of the number. And in fact, it's different by category, obviously. The majority of shoppers in most online product categories buy from Australian sites. So things like food and groceries, it's obviously not right on 100%, but it's so close that it, almost doesn't matter. Furniture, largely Australian. Alcohol, largely Australian. Most of these things are very, very strongly bought from Australian retailers online. Then we go through these others. They're still very high level. Skincare, shoes, still strongly Australian. It isn't until we get to things like ebooks where you've actually got only 33% being bought by people from Australian online stores or Australian retailers in their online areas. Only these few areas are you actually finding overseas outstrips Australian. So there's the answer to that burning question. Now, what does that mean for retail visits? Well, Australians made a combined 1.34 billion trips to department stores, discount stores, hardware stores, homeware, clothing and music stores and newsagents over the last financial year, around 170 million fewer than we did, say, 5 years ago. That's despite our growing population. And hardest hit have been those stores that face the strongest digital disruption. So clearly, we see newsagents have dropped visitations quite substantially. We see department stores down a bit. Hardware stores, bucking the trend, thank you Bunnings, has gone up. Clothing stores down a bit, and music stores down quite substantially in percentage terms. So you can actually see what's happening to visitation. But while the decrease in visitation might mean fewer customers coming into the store, it doesn't necessarily mean fewer sales. It may be that those customers are actually, instead of going to 3 or 4 stores before they find what they want, they might be looking online and then coming to the store to buy. So, this is not necessarily the end of shopping. This is actually a change, and it's really people being omni-channel. The data here, and what we're looking at, is from June 2010 to June 2015, is the issue of whether it's online retailers only, new online store only, or whether it's actually retailers themselves actually picking up. So what we're seeing is that we've actually got online stores only with pretty much it in 2010. Perhaps not 100%, we didn't measure it, but by 2011, 93% of online sales were made by online-only stores. And what we see is that retailers have fought back. Retailers have actually developed their own online channels, and we can actually see the growth of that through that blue line, till 1/3 of the online sales are now coming through retailers who have their own online channels. So it is omni-channel. Consumers are making their own choice as to how they shop, how they find their information, and they will use whatever channel they choose, and it's not much we can do about it except be there. Now let's look at some of the other interesting things, category killers and online-only retailers in context. So if we look here, this is the total commodity market, this discretionary spend bit, that $107 billion that we've been talking about. So basically Harvey Norman grabs the lion's share of that, small lion's share, top of the pops, 7.8%, followed by Bunnings, followed by the Good Guys, JB Hi-Fi and Myer. Online-only stores are taking 8.2%. And you can see the green, the light green things there are showing what's gone up and what's gone down. But that's your broad commodity space. If we then look at electrical goods, we're beginning to see some category killers coming in here. We can begin to see Harvey Norman has 18.8% of that $27.6 billion market, followed by the Good Guys with 14%, followed by JB Hi-Fi at 10%. Online-only stores, 8.8%. They all operate a little differently. Then when we look at furniture, we've actually got Harvey Norman way ahead of the rest, 25% of the market, that 12 billion market. Online stores, quite low. Online-only stores, less than 3%. If we look at that music, movies and TV, JB Hi-Fi again, kind of category killer, 33%. Online-only stores, 10.5%. Hardware, DIY and gardening, 10.6 billion market and Bunnings has 64% of it. That's a real category killer. That's phenomenal. The online-only stores, tiny, 2.2. You almost wonder whether Bunnings has become the kind of bricks and mortar online store. It's just got everything. Books and e-books, you've actually got Dymocks now being a category killer because everyone else has died, I suppose. Your online-only stores at 38%. So this is a fundamentally changed market. And for women's clothing, we've got no real category killers. What we're actually seeing here, a $13.5 billion market. Myer at the top, but only with 8.5%. Target 7, Kmart 6, Big W 5, David Jones 4. It's got a huge long tail, thousands upon thousands of small retailers, and the online-only stores less than 7%. Men's clothing, similar sort of pattern, more online-only stores, over 6% there. But again, you've got, not such a strong, no major category killer in this thing. You've got lots and lots of little stores. And then when we think about the international imports, there's always a buzz when there's some kind of new international fast fashion giant launching in Australia. And we've had a few, and I think everyone in the retail market's kind of quaking. So it's very interesting to see that, in fact, they haven't gained large share of the market. It's not to say that they won't. They've been picking off share, but basically they're relatively small. And then, of course, we've got our homegrown Australian Cotton On, which is doing better than all of them, but it's still relatively small. Now, obviously, they'll do a lot to capture share, and you can't not look at them. But, given all the hype, my guess would have been they'd be a lot bigger than that in this category. Now I want to look at groceries, the whole grocery market. Now, this market is almost as big on its own as the discretionary commodity market. And of course, if there hadn't been price wars and, all of those sorts of things, and that grocery spend market had actually kept up with everything else, it would have been bigger. But as it is, it's just slightly lower than the total discretionary market, valued at about $102 billion. And interestingly, for a market so big, this category is dominated by just a few key players. Of that $102 billion, $88.9 billion goes to supermarkets. That's 87% of grocery expenditure, with only $13 billion or 13% left for the butcher, the deli, the fruit shop, bakery, market, corner convenience store or seafood retailer. And the two main retailers, Coles and Woolworths, each claim about a third of our total spend in this grocery dollars. Remember, even compared to the top two stores for the other commodity markets, Harvey Norman and Bunnings only taking, 7 or 8% of that commodity market. So this is a very heavily dominated market that we're looking at. And at that sort of market, a 0.1% shift or gain in supermarket share is a gain of, $90 million in gross annual revenues. So it's really important that we talk in decimals. I tend to round, but every little 0.1 makes a huge difference. So what we see here is the trend, and over the last year, Woolworths, which had looked like it was reversing a bit of a backward trend, has lost 2.3 points in share, from 39.9 to 37.6. IGA fell a little bit. Of that 2.4 points lost by Woolworths and IGA, together worth about $214 million, Coles picked up 0.2% and other supermarkets shared about 0.7 points. Aldi is the biggest gain in this place. So what we're seeing is Aldi's gained the lion's share of that drop-off, and Aldi is the one that's on the move. So it's now been 2 years since Aldi overtook IGA by share of market, and it's continued to make ground. So, and now up to, 11.8, Aldi at 11.8%. And what we're seeing is, they're putting up new stores in different states and things like that. So they're going to give the big ones a run for their money, but there's a huge deal of difference in size. So we now talk about larceny and leakage. And this is what it's all about. I mean, this is a market. There's not there's no new people It's not like Indonesia where somehow people have never had supermarkets and you roll out supermarkets and there's an influx of things. This is a set market. If you gain share, you take it from someone else. So it's one which is all about leakage, losing, and larceny, stealing. So it's pretty important for supermarkets to really understand their customers, what they're buying, where they're buying them from, when they're buying them from them, from somebody else, whether they're visiting other stores. We saw this increased number of trips to supermarkets. Some of them are to people's main supermarket, just going again, but a lot of them are to other supermarkets. So increasingly, our shoppers are a little kind of meretricious. So this chart is essentially looking at where main shoppers shopped. So main shoppers at Woolworths, if people say Woolworths is my main shop, about 98% of those people will have shopped at Woolworths in the last 4 weeks, last 7 days, right? At Coles, 97% would have shopped at Coles of their main shoppers. Of Aldi main shoppers, 97 would have. So people who say a supermarket is their main supermarket are going to shop there. That's fine. Let's come back to Woolworths. So most of our main Woolworths shoppers shop at Woolworths, but 44% of them in the last 7 days also shopped at Coles. Bit of leakage. 22% of them also shopped at Aldi, and 26% of them shopped at IGA. So what we're seeing is a lot of shopping around. And similarly for Coles, you've got 97%, but 49% of them, of Coles' main shoppers, also shopped at Woolworths. 24% also shopped at Aldi. So we've got a lot of mixing and matching, a lot of larceny going on. And I think the other important thing is just the size of the charts. So if we look at Woolworths, it adds to almost 200%, about 180. That means on average, a Woolworths shopper, main shopper, is shopping at almost 2 stores per week. And Coles is pretty similar. Aldi shoppers, on the other hand, high number, they're shopping at about 2.5 stores in an average week. So, you know, we start to see the kind of movement going on there. If we then turn that into dollars, we know, and the data supports, that if people say a supermarket is their main supermarket, they'll spend more money there. That's for sure. So clearly what supermarkets are trying to do is to get people to consider them a main shopper and then spend more of their dollars there. When we turn this into dollars, what we see is, for instance, of our main Woolworths shoppers, you've got 20 of that $33.5 billion that goes to Woolworths. 23 comes from their main shoppers. Another 10 billion comes from other shoppers. And they lose about 9 billion. So we can look at this in terms of dollars. Similarly, you've got for Coles, they're 29 billion, 28.8. 19 billion comes from people who say Coles is my main shop. They get about 9.5 billion from other grocery shops' main shoppers, and they lose about 8. So we can see this kind of gain and loss going on. So we need to understand why, and that's where you actually need to get right into the data. What is it that's making people shop elsewhere? Where are they actually coming from? Where are the big dollars coming from? Because as we said, if you can switch even $1 more per customer, it'll make a huge difference. So what we do is we actually try and understand where does $100 of grocery spend go, and then where does it come from? So at Woolworths, your average $100 from a Woolworths main grocery buyer, they'll spend $72 at Woolworths, they'll spend $12.20 at Coles, they'll spend $5.39 at Aldi, they'll spend $5.32 at IGA, and $5 somewhere else. So we're able to see exactly where the leakage is going. And then when we ask people and we look at what it is they're looking for and what they actually bought there, you really get a good handle on what to do about it. Similar sort of picture. And then we say, okay, so where is their extra shopping coming from? And we can actually see, Woolworths adds to its main shoppers, a bunch from Coles, $13.82. So they're giving $12 to Coles, they're taking $13.82 from Coles. You can see they're getting $5.60 from Aldi, they're getting 1964 from Aldi. They're giving Aldi $5.39. They're taking 1964. So we can start to see this is all about, as we say, leakage. Where are your main shoppers shopping elsewhere, and who are you grabbing from elsewhere? Is that a question?
Yes, please. Just briefly, are they aggregate figures across Australia?
Yes. That's an average $100 spent across Australia.
Okay, so in regions, for instance, that don't have an Aldi store,
yes,
particularly South Australia,
the numbers would look different. Yeah, and we could slice the data. That's the joy of this. You can actually go down, let's look in South Australia, or let's look at a region, for instance, where Aldi isn't. Let's just take all of the areas where Aldi is, remove them from the planet, and then say, okay, what does that look like? What will it look like when Aldi goes there? That's the kind of thing that you can possibly do. And look, the other point that, okay.
Just where in that slide, is it really leakage in licensing? I live in Security where there is both Coles, Woolworths and Aldi.
Yeah.
And I go to each for different purposes. I tend to, I might say Coles and Woolworths is the main one because that's where most of them, but I'm not leaking to Aldi. It's because they do things better in certain categories than others do.
If I'm Coles and you're my mate and you consider me your main shopping centre and you go to Aldi, I reckon you've leaked to Aldi. No, it's an interesting point. Is it leakage and larceny? I think they're great words. I think they say it all. Consumers will always make choices, and it's really up to the supermarkets. They must understand, why do you actually go to Aldi? What can I do as Coles to make you change? Or what can I do as Woolworths? You're coming into my store. How do I get you to see me as your main grocery store? So that's what it's all about. The point I wanted to make here, though, is that in order to understand what's going on, you need this kind of consumer data. The kind of data that you get from, loyalty cards and your own supermarket trend data, your scan data and all of those things, that tells you one piece of the puzzle. So if you're looking at your loyalty data, you'll know, for those people who've got a loyalty card, exactly what they're doing at your store. You'll really struggle to know what they're doing elsewhere, and you won't know much about where the other dollars are coming from. And in a market which is all about stealing each other's customers or gaining a bit of market share or else, that's what you need. You need that total picture. You need to be able to see the ebbs and flows because there's quite a lot of them. Well, that was fun. So we begin to understand why people do these things. Just broadly, when we ask people what's important to them, obviously things like high standards of food safety, being close to home and good value and all of these sorts of things matter. What's really interesting though is that it's not, if you pick one of them, then a whole range of them will also matter. People sort of want everything, and the challenge is to actually understand under what circumstances they need things, when is it really important to be close to home, and when is it just as good to be close to work, for what products and for what big items. So for instance, in some of the, 1 second or I'll lose my train of thought, I'm getting old. When it comes to alcohol, what you actually often find is that people say things like a good range is really important or the wine that I like is really important, but then they'll go to a big category killer like Dan Murphy when they're buying in bulk. Or they say proximity is important until you're buying in bulk, and then you go to Dan Murphy. So you've got to understand all of those nuances.
An earlier slide showed that Tesco were simplifying their range. To what extent is the simplicity of the store an attractive factor? Aldi, one of the appeals to me of Aldi is that it's easy to define things.
Look, it's important for some people. I'm just seeing here well laid out and those sorts of things. Yeah, this is it. It's like this is a ranking. It's overall. But then what you find is certain people just like things nicely laid out. Others just couldn't give a damn. I mean, the success of things like My Chemist and Chemist Warehouse is proof that it's not all about perfect layout. I come back to it. We're human. We like it all to be perfect, laid out, all of those things. I have to say, I remember my mother when I started looking at groceries many years ago, she said, no, it's really simple. I just wish that they'd have a shop that had just the things that I wanted and nothing else. And I said, no, Mum, but you know what? She was right. She was absolutely right. And that's what we're all trying to create. Yes?
Just on that same point in reference to what
can't go backwards.
No, that's okay. We talked about
By the report.
technology, and I think Harvey Norman has lost 4.7% and Apple has grown 4.6% over the same period. And I'm wondering the extent to which the bricks and mortar versus online is certainly
You
one.
can't hear the questions. We're going to have questions. We've got the mics, or we know you have questions.
So that online versus bricks and mortar is one filter that you can look at it.
Yep.
But I'm wondering, to exactly your point about what your mother wanted, the extent to which brand-specific stores, where you know exactly what you're getting and you have a deep expertise in the retail provision, makes a difference.
Absolutely. Look, I think the success of Apple stores, the question is whether there's another lens to look at, which is about broad brush stores versus brand specific stores like Apple, where you actually get that unique experience. You know what you're getting, it's only going to have Apple things. And the answer is, the success of Apple stores probably proves that that's a very important thing for some people. The data that we've presented here really doesn't go down to that sort of level, but the data that exists in the database that you can actually subscribe to goes right down to that absolute level, at which point what you need to do is say, what is the lens through which I'm going to look at this, and start to understand what's going to work for you, where you can actually make a difference. Okay, I'm moving on. Not even going to look at the audience anymore in case someone asks a question. So let's look at the importance of loyalty cards. So 51%, most people actually tell us that it's important to have a good loyalty reward card. And we see Woolworths has got a good loyalty reward program, say 37% of all grocery buyers or 58% of Woolworths shoppers. And Coles is seen by 34% to have a good loyalty program, or 57%. So essentially, this is a market share thing, and what you see is those who mainly shop mostly think that their store's got a good loyalty program. That's what that says. Now what do we see? We actually see here that 2 in 3 grocery buyers who mainly shop at Woolworths have a Woolworths Everyday Rewards card. I think they're now called Woolworths Rewards cards. And 54% of people who mainly shop at Coles have a Flybuys card. And what we've seen is that these cards are moving up. Major strong gains in the Woolworths Rewards card in the last, 6 months or so? A bit more than that. And Coles flat, but starting to kick up. Reward cards are a big thing. And obviously they're both designed to make people loyal, to create that sort of stickiness, but they're also collecting masses of data. So, this is the new world of data, and it's sort of permission-based data that you're actually getting. The next thing we see though, and this is what people may not know, is that 36% of Coles main shoppers actually have a Woolworths Everyday Reward card, and 32% of Woolworths main shoppers have a Flybuys. So that's people sort of saying, yep, want to be in both. And there's no real penalties. It's not like Qantas and Virgin. If you fall below, you get kicked out of gold class and you can't go in the lounge. That doesn't happen with there's no penalty for having both. But do Woolworths really know that Coles shoppers are using their Woolworths card? Do they care? Is there something they can do about it? And the same for Coles. So in a nutshell, what it means is that overall, we've got some 46% of people have an Everyday Rewards card, 46% of shoppers overall, and 38% have a Coles Flybuys card. And this is really, really important stuff. This is going to grow, and it's going to grow because retailers are continually going to be looking for data that's collected in this way. It's not just about being good for customers, or that's one of the key aims as well. Now, we've also seen that 100% of food and groceries that are bought online are bought from Australian retailers, obviously enough, but supermarket shopping represents only a very small amount of that, and around 1.4 billion. It's interesting. Many people say they'd like to do their grocery shopping online, their supermarket shopping online. They actually don't do it. In 2014, 25% of grocery buyers said they'd consider doing it. A year later, only 3% did in an average 4-week period. So, it's just not happening. That's the real issue. And whether it's because the offer's not right, whether it's because there are still barriers, or whether because there's something to do with convenience of actually going in, getting it, taking it away, who knows? It's not happening as yet. Now let's look briefly at shopping centres. Wonderful place to play or something quite evil? Who knows? Depends on your perspective. This is just the number of shoppers that shop in an average 4-week period to June 2015. Top of the pops, Chadstone, followed by Westfield, Parramatta, and then we scoot all the way down. They're the big players. And then you have a range of smaller, still large but smaller, right through to very, very local shopping centres. Now, I want to make the point that not all people are alike, not all shopping centres are alike. There are huge extremes with shopping centres, just as there are huge extremes of people. So that leads us to understanding communities. We developed Helix Personas to help us understand communities, a powerful psychographic segmentation tool that lets us understand why traditional luxury brands are really strong in some areas where you've actually got really affluent people. So this is affluence. This is kind of your metro techs, young, trendy city dwellers, right through to Struggle Street, people just getting by, and golden years. So there's a range of different communities. Within that, there's lots of detail. But any segmentation can tell you where the wealthy people are. What this helps you understand is not only where the wealthy people are, but people who make different choices to buy a luxury European brand or to buy something that's local artisan brand. All of those sorts of things, or just not go shopping at all, go trekking. So these sorts of things help us understand that. When we look then at the proportion of these that go shopping at supermarkets, I'm sorry, the slide makes it an even greater distinction than it should be. But at the top end, you've got somewhere between 85 plus are actually going to shopping centres. At the lower end, the older people and the battlers, just under 80%. But you know what? Across the board, the vast majority of all sorts of communities go to a shopping centre. People say they hate them, they'd never go there. They lie, they go there. Now, although there's a whole range of shopping centres, let's have a look at this. Macquarie, major shopping centre at Macquarie. Blue was that leading lifestyle, affluent, top end of the market. Light blue is metro tech, young, affluent city dwellers. So Macquarie, this is their shopping base, predominantly that top end of the market. On the other hand, come down to say Wendouree, and 76% of their shoppers are battlers. So you can see extraordinary differences in those shopping centres. And they have different kind of stores. There'll be the same, there'll be a Coles, there'll be a Woolworths, there'll often be a Myer, but there'll be a different range of specialty stores, and you'll actually find things like really upmarket products in some stores, and then you'll find the Pandoras in the next store, and then you'll find little local Kleins and things like that in the other shopping centres. It will all make sense. If we then look at Chadstone, because Chadstone's one of the big ones, and we saw that if we saw who goes to Chadstone. If we draw a line around that 5K and call that their catchment area, what we see is the catchment area is predominantly this top end of the market. Let's not get into detail. It's dark blue and light blue, right down to the last percentages. The people living out in Chadstone are leading lifestyle, metro tech, they're affluent. Who shops there? All of a sudden, what we see is a whole bunch of other kinds of people. We've got golden years, we've got Struggle Street, we've got just getting by, just making the money. We've got a whole range of people being drawn into Chadstone. Chadstone isn't just a shopping centre that draws from its own catchment and around it. It's drawing everyone into it. And you can see, that progressive thinkers and humanitarians, they were sort of about 40% of the catchment area. They're now way down in terms of the shopping centre. And then if you look at Parramatta, that's another big one. That's an interesting one. Not at all like Chadstone. That's all about getting by and golden years at the top there. Aspiring immigrants, the poorer ends, budget lifestyle, is the people living in the area. It's a little bit of blue there in that top corner. And it again draws largely its own group, but draws in others. So the issue is a shopping centre isn't just a service to the local community. On the other hand, Wendouree is probably not going to drag in too many metro techs. You know, it's a much more local area shopping centre. And the trick is obviously to understand the kind of people that you are able to draw, get your shops sorted out and all of those sorts of things to get it absolutely right. So, retail's new frontier, and I've got 2 minutes, so that's all we're going to get on that. Our retailers, the people that we do business with, are increasingly seeing themselves as media channels as well as stores. Their customers coming in are also potentially other people's audiences. The media space today is all about audiences. Their physical and virtual footprints are often really large, and they can offer mass and targeted advertising, thereby generating a separate and complementary revenue stream. They can get a whole new revenue stream just by the footfall traffic they get. So Westfield shopping centres are massive outdoor and indoor sites, both static and digital. And Telstra, this is really interesting. See these things here, those banners? They are actually Telstra, who's recently commercialised its massive telephone box network into new media businesses. So there they are, they're new media businesses, they're like posters, but they can be digital, so they're almost like TV. And then we worked with Red Rooster to profile hundreds of its locations and created 6 major groupings so it could offer targeted messages relevant to the local foot traffic. So it's not just a Red Rooster shop selling chickens, it's actually a spot, an outdoor advertising space, clearly able to identify the audience that it's wanting to attract in the relevant space, and it becomes its own advertising vehicle. This is only the beginning. So what's Roy Morgan doing about it? Well, number one, we give you our Christmas wishes and a prediction for the future, which is that retail will be okay this Christmas. That's what Roy Morgan does. The next thing though, let me just say, is more seriously, that's what we're doing, but more seriously, we're working in partnership with some of the biggest partners and some of the smallest and most innovative partners in the digital media and big data space to create richer data assets than we've ever had before and that anyone in Australia's ever had before, and in fact that anyone anywhere in the world has today, to understand offline and online together consumer choice and behaviour. So all of the data that we see is being linked to all of the other data sets and all of the other partners' sources of information and technology. Just as an example then, we've developed a complete toolkit for retailers to plan, buy and evaluate their digital marketing campaigns. So step one, use Roy Morgan single source. That's the data set that I've been talking to you about all the way along, 50,000 interviews each year, to profile your customers, your competitors' customers, switches, market share, a store's trade area, and ultimately plan your campaign. Work out what you're going to do and plan your campaign. And then execute that campaign, and that's what's new, using our extensive partner network to buy the appropriate media and maximise return on investment. So our partners are covering the full gamut from traditional media like catalogues and outdoor through to digital, programmatic and email lists. When I looked at that retail category in the business survey, only 27% of them had heard of programmatic media buying, only 9% were doing it. So if people don't know what programmatic media buying is, ask us afterwards. Each of our partners in this space understands our data, so what they'll be doing is taking the data that was thought through, the plans that were done in the planning stage, and running the campaign, converting it into an absolute campaign. So now that you've actually run a campaign to use the Roy Morgan tools, such as our website and digital campaign evaluation, you can understand whether your target market has actually seen that campaign and taken action, such as have they clicked on the advertisement or downloaded a brochure. And our campaign evaluation platform is actually in partnership with Telstra or powered by Telstra, and it provides industry-leading technology and insights into the new world. So major partnership of data, technology, all coming together. And finally, we're able to now campaign and quantify your campaign sales and campaign sales uplift. using the new sales evaluation platform that combines credit cards, third-party transaction data with Roy Morgan single source data. So you've always been able to sort of watch the cash register go ka-chink, ka-chink, say, yeah, the sales are up. Now what we're able to do is to say who's buying, when, and you'll be able to actually understand what to do with the campaign in real time. So this is due to a partnership with, it's called Data Republic, Australia's probably largest data marketplace, majority owned by Westpac, and that enables us to analyse transaction data with time, location, and really sensitive data at that level from hundreds of sectors, including things like specialty shops through to doctors and utility companies. So what it's doing for us is to taking our broad brush framework that enables us to understand the context and actually bring all of this rich real-time data down to very, very finite levels of detail to enable you to actually monitor these campaigns. Thank you all.